This is a creepy panda production. Gothic Apparition. My buddy Jake convinced me to join him on a road trip to the Carpathian Mountains. He said he found an authentic Gothic experience in an isolated village in Romania. With nothing better to do, I agreed. As we drove on the narrow, winding roads, with each turn the modern world seemed to slip further behind. After hours of travel, we arrived at our destination as dusk settled. The village was nestled in a valley, with a decrepit castle looming on a cliff like a sentinel. We checked into the only inn, a quaint place that looked centuries old. The innkeeper, a stoic middle-aged man named Radu, had a certain coldness in his eyes. He handed us our room key and warned us to stay indoors after dark. The sunset bathed the village in a deep blood-red hue. It was almost picturesque until the howling wind started, sounding almost like whispers. Curiosity overpowered Radu's warning, and we ventured out. We roamed the cobbled streets, and I felt the echo of footsteps that weren't ours. Jake insisted it was just the echo of our own steps, but I wasn't convinced. We reached the center of the village where an ancient church stood. The heavy door creaked open on its own, inviting or perhaps daring us inside. The inside of the church was cold, the air thick with the scent of mold and old incense. The only light came from the moon through the stained glass windows. Then we saw her, a woman in a white gown, her back to us. Jake called out, but she didn't respond. As we approached, she turned slowly. Her eyes were voids and her face was deathly pale. A scream lodged in my throat as she reached towards us with an inhuman speed. We ran, but the village was a maze. Every turn seemed to bring us back to the church. The woman was always there, just at the edge of sight. Reality seemed twisted, the Gothic spires of the castle leering down. Eventually, we found the inn, breathless and terrified. Radu was waiting, his expression grim. Without words, he ushered us inside and bolted the door. That night, the wind sounded like voices calling my name. Sleep was fitful, filled with nightmares of the woman with the hollow eyes. In the morning, we packed quickly, eager to leave this place. As we left, Radu handed me an antique photograph. It showed the village, looking exactly like it did now, with the same woman standing in front of the church. The photo was dated over 100 years ago. Radu's only words to us, "You saw her, yes? You cannot unsee." The drive home was silent, a stark contrast to the laughter that filled our arrival. The Carpathians held secrets, and we were lucky to escape with little more than a haunting memory. But every now and then, when the wind whispers, I can't help but look over my shoulder, half expecting to see her again. Phantom Manor. Ever since I was young, the abandoned estate at the edge of town fascinated me. They called it Phantom Manor. It stood decrepit, shrouded in twisted vines, and whispered about in hushed tones by the townsfolk of Bishopville, South Carolina. Rumors of a family tragedy and hauntings clung to it like fog to a swamp. It was a cursed place, or so the legend went. One October evening, curiosity got the better of me. The air was chilled, bearing the scent of decaying leaves and distant wood smoke. My heart raced as I approached the wrought iron gates, which groaned open at my touch as if inviting me in. The pathway to the manor was overgrown, and each step I took seemed to echo with the crunching of dead leaves underfoot. The grand wooden doors of Phantom Manor were surprisingly easy to open. With a nudge, they revealed the manor's interior, dressed in a thick layer of dust and silence more profound than I'd ever known. My flashlight skimmed over antique furniture, ornate mirrors, and portraits with eyes that followed my every move. There came a moment when the light flickered, casting dancing shadows across the faded opulence. My heart skipped a beat, and I heard a child's laughter echo down the corridor. I gave chase, drawn by the possibility of the manor's secrets revealing themselves. The sound led me upstairs, where the air grew colder, denser. I found myself in the hallway, lined with locked doors. One by one, I tried the brass handles, but all were immovable until I reached the end of the corridor. The door there swung open silently, tempting me inside. Before me lay what once must have been a nursery, now filled with a harrowing presence. Amid the forgotten toys and cradle, I saw a figure in the corner, a little girl dressed in white, her eyes hollow. She beckoned me closer, and as if bewitched, I obeyed. As our distance closed, her form disintegrated into mist, and I was assaulted by whispers of despair and agony. The whispers grew louder, and the mist swirled violently around me. I wanted to run, but my limbs refused to obey. It felt as if the very soul of the house had ensnared me in its tragic history. An overwhelming sense of loss and torment washed over me, suffocating, relentless. Eventually, the mist receded, and I found my senses. I stumbled out of the nursery and down the hall, racing to escape the oppressive air behind me. Thumping footsteps seemed to follow, and I dared not look back, fear propelling me faster towards the promise of the outside world. I burst out into the night, lungs heaving, and didn't stop running until the manor was a mere shadow against the moonlit sky. Only then did I dare to breathe, my mind struggling to comprehend what had transpired. The whispers, the ghostly child, that agonizing fear, had it been real? In the days that followed, I avoided the manor, yet its presence lingered with me like a scar. I often woke from dreams where the child's hollow gaze beckoned me back to that nursery, to secrets still hidden within the faded walls of Phantom Manor. The experience became a story I dared only whisper, for fear of awakening its spectral inhabitants. But time has a way of dulling even the sharpest of terrors, and soon, the manor became once again just a decrepit structure on the outskirts of Bishopville, an eerie landmark discussed in skeptical tones. People forgot or chose to ignore whatever darkness had once pulsed within its walls. And life went on, with the eerie silhouette of Phantom Manor watching over us, a silent testament to the night when the veil between worlds grew thin, and I glimpsed the forlorn spirits that called it home. But I never ventured near it again, the echoes of that night etched forever in my memory. Shadowed corridors. Darkness seeped through the cracks of the boarded-up windows, and the uninhabited corridors echoed with a silence so intense it became a presence of its own. Working a night shift at the old St. Augustine's hospital wasn't exactly the high point of my fledgling medical career, but as a recently minted nurse, I didn't have the luxury of choice. The antiquated building clung to its place in Brooklyn like a stubborn relic, its newer facilities a block away, bustling with life. This annex, however, was waiting to be demolished, functioning solely to house the records of decades of medical history until they were digitized. Every evening, I crossed the threshold of this ghostly archive, feeling the weight of time heavy in the air. The job was simple: review, categorize, and prepare the old patient records for their migration to the modern age. That night, however, began with unease clawing at the edges of my mind. As usual, I started in the basement where the oldest records were kept. The dim light of my desk lamp barely pushed against the encroaching shadows that filled the expansive room, and the chill of late autumn brought tremors that weren't solely from the cold. Time passed in a strange cadence, the tick-tock of my watch punctuating the silence. Then, a series of soft taps came from the other end of the room, as if somebody was lightly knocking on wood. It was probably just the building settling, I told myself, or a rat exploring the crevices of the old structure. The sounds abated, and I immersed myself once again in the dusty files in front of me. But the tranquility was short-lived. Whispers crawled through the quiet, unintelligible and faint. They were close yet nowhere, sending cold shivers down my spine. I stood up, peering into the dark, trying to discern the source. Hello? The word barely left my lips before regretting giving voice to my fear, as the silence now seemed accusatory. No answer came, only the echo of my own voice against the stone walls. I began to question my senses, my sanity, chalking it up to exhaustion and the eerie setting. Determined to shake it off, I returned to my desk, but as I did, I caught sight of something impossible. A shadow, not cast by any discernible source, undulating along the walls and creeping closer. Panic settled in, and I prepared to flee, but my professional resolve anchored me. I couldn't just leave my post without explanation. Steadying my breath, I approached where I'd seen the anomaly, only to find an old patient log had slipped from its shelf. Relieved, I convinced myself it was the cause of the strange shadow. I reached to replace the binder but paused, my eyes catching the name on the cover, Marianne Dower. The name was familiar, too familiar. Marianne was the subject of an old hospital tale, a nurse who'd vanished within these very walls decades prior. It was said her shadow could still be glimpsed, wandering the halls. I laughed it off, a silly superstition, yet the giggles that bubbled up felt hollow. Returning to work, the earlier incidents receded like a bad dream upon waking. Hours drifted by, the whispers now dismissed figments. As dawn approached, my replacement failed to arrive, and a knot of concern lodged itself in my throat. With the sun peeking over the horizon, I ventured into the corridors to check. They seemed longer now, stretching into an almost infinite darkness, my footsteps the only sound. Suddenly, whispers multiplied, and the temperature dropped so markedly that my breath fogged before me. Shadows waltzed along the walls as if they had a macabre life of their own. Then I heard my name chased by a soft giggle from behind a closed door. Heart racing, I approached the source. Dread and curiosity at odds. A faded sign read, "Nursing Staff Quarters." Pushing the door open, I peered inside to find an old room preserved in time, as if awaiting Marianne's return. The bed was made, and personal items littered the space. An old nurse's cap lay on the dresser, dust undisturbed. Out the corner of my eye, I spotted movement in the compact mirror. Swiveling around, nothing was amiss. Yet I could not shake the sensation someone was watching me. Whispers coalesced into a chilling plea, "Find me." I stumbled back into the corridor, mind reeling. The echo of "find me" reverberated as the whispers ceased. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted with the morning sun streaming into the hall from high windows. Maybe it was merely the night playing tricks, the isolation, the stories. Regardless, I couldn't shrug off what I'd experienced as simple imagination. I decided to dig deeper, to search the records for what happened to Marianne. Days turned to weeks, and the archives revealed their secrets slowly. Marianne had been well-liked, dedicated, with an unblemished record until she disappeared without a trace. The case went cold, no evidence, no leads, just gone. But the records hinted at a dark undercurrent of patients' complaints and strange occurrences leading up to her vanishing. Her last entry spoke briefly of finding something that would change everything. What she had discovered remained a mystery, along with her fate. I could no longer view the halls of St. Augustine's as mere passageways. They were the keepers of secrets, guardians of truths too harrowing for daylight. As much as I tried, my nights were no longer spent solely with the records. I searched for Marianne, hoping to uncover where she might have gone, or what had claimed her. The whispers became my silent companions, the shadows my wary observers. My coworkers regarded my obsession as quirky, a hobby born out of working in such a grim setting. They hadn't felt the cold breath of the unknown, or heard the intangible pleas of a soul unmoored. Then, one evening, I discovered it, an unmarked, sealed file buried beneath mundane inventories. Marianne's neat handwriting adorned the first page, discussing an experimental therapy gone horribly awry, something hidden by the hospital, stained by fear and madness. My hands trembled as I read on. This was it, the something she had referred to. As I pieced together the puzzle, the truth of her fate hinted at an impossible outcome. Marianne had become a part of the hospital itself, her spirit entwined with the shadowed corridors, locked in a perpetual echo of her final moments. The revelation was too much. I shared my findings with the authorities, but after so many years, what could they do? The decision to demolish the old annex was expedited. As they gutted the old building, I watched from a distance, a bittersweet sensation overtaking me. Would this set Marianne free, or forever entomb her with the rubble? The day the walls came down, a sudden fury of wind surged from the collapsing structure, carrying whispers and a single, melodic giggle that seemed to be carried away with the breeze. In the sunlight, for the briefest of moments, I saw a shadow flicker and fade, the last vestige of Marianne Dower, the nurse who'd never left St. Augustine's haunted halls. Vengeful Poltergeist. The floorboards creaked underfoot as I stepped into the old, abandoned manor on the outskirts of Savannah, Georgia. It was rumored to be haunted by a poltergeist, the former master of the house, who met an untimely death at the hands of an unknown assailant. Locals avoided the place, saying that the vengeful spirit wreaked havoc on anyone who dared enter. My fascination with the paranormal drove me to this moment, standing in the foyer of a place heavy with history and dread. Inside, the air was musty, heavy with the scent of decay. Dust motes danced lazily in the light streaming through cracked window panes. Despite the layers of grime, the remnants of grandeur were evident in the gilded staircase railing and grand chandelier that loomed overhead, now draped with cobwebs. As twilight approached, shadows stretched like fingers across the walls, and the atmosphere changed palpably. I could feel a suffocating pressure, as if the house itself was aware of my presence. Whispers filled the silence, and a chill traced the base of my spine. I set up my equipment, voice recorders, and an EMF electromagnetic field reader in the main parlor where the poltergeist was most frequently seen. Or so the stories went. It didn't take long for the temperature to drop, the chill in the room becoming almost tangible. My breath formed puffs of vapor in the freezing air as I called out, asking if anyone was there with me. The EMF reader's lights flickered, then blazed to life, indicating a presence. A whispered yes was caught on my voice recorder, raising the hairs on my neck. Suddenly, objects around the room began to move of their own accord. Books flung themselves from shelves, furniture slid across the floor with loud scrapes, and the chandelier above started to swing with a screeching creak. Fear clutched at my throat. This was no mere haunting. This was a force with anger so palpable, it was as if I could reach out and touch it. Determined to uncover the truth, I plodded deeper into the bowels of the manor. The grand dining hall, once a place of laughter and light, lay desolate. Broken china littered the floor, and the long table was draped with a moldy cloth. As I passed through, chairs scraped back unaided, inviting me to sit. I refused the ghostly gesture, a tremor of unease running through me. The spectral activity grew more aggressive as I reached the library. The figure of a man, distorted and flickering like a faulty projection, glared at me from across the room. His eyes burned with malice, his mouth moving in silent curses. It was him, the poltergeist, his expression telling stories of betrayal and unfinished business. The air crackled with energy, books hurling themselves at me with deadly precision. I ducked and weaved, dodging the literary projectiles, all the while trying to communicate with the furious spirit. I pleaded with him, asking what he wanted, why he was so angry. The violence ceased abruptly, and the ghost's form became clearer, his voice now discernible. He spoke of deceit, of a precious heirloom stolen, a family line disgraced, all leading to his untimely death. With every word, the temperature rose, as though the heat of his rage was manifesting physically. I swore to help, to find the truth about the stolen heirloom, and as I did, a sense of calm settled over the decaying manor. The poltergeist's form faltered, then steadied, becoming almost peaceful in appearance. Details of the night of his murder spilled forth, a description of his killer, a tale of hidden jealousy and greed within his own family. Armed with this new insight, I trekked back to civilization, to the historical archives where whispers of the past reside. Hours turned into days as I pored over old newspapers and legal documents. A breakthrough came with a yellowed piece of gossip. A distant relative, embittered and vengeful, coveted the heirloom, a priceless statuette believed to grant power and fortune. Justice was long overdue. I returned to the manor, a plan formulating in my mind. Making my way to the study, I found the concealed compartment behind the grand bookshelf, untouched by time. Within it lay the object of so much bloodshed, the statuette, deceptively benign in appearance. The poltergeist appeared before me, his manifestation now calm, inquisitive. With the statuette in hand, I explained my discovery, how I would return it to the rightful authorities, and reveal the truth about his untimely demise. His countenance softened, and for a brief moment, a smile flickered over his translucent features. As dawn broke, the first light in decades to penetrate the gloom of the study, I could feel a shift. The house was no longer oppressive, the air no longer thick with anger. With the mystery solved and the promise of justice served, the poltergeist's ties to this world seemed to diminish. I exited the manor as the sun climbed higher, casting golden rays through twisted branches and overgrown gardens. The atmosphere was lighter, almost hopeful. When I turned back, it was as if the house itself had sighed in relief, releasing a century of sorrow. The ghost was gone, his vengeance finally appeased, leaving the world of the living to reclaim the manor as nothing more than a structure of wood and stone, its nightmare finally at an end. Victorian Specters. It was a cold January night, the kind where your breath turns to mist before your eyes and the frost nips at any exposed skin it can find. My old friend Tom had invited me to spend the weekend at his family's estate in the countryside, not far from the dreary old town of Whitby. The estate had been in his family since the Victorian era, a legacy he was proud of, if somewhat unnerved by. His recent correspondence had hinted at strange occurrences within the ancient walls, and I must confess a morbid curiosity got the better of me. Upon arriving, the manor loomed like a silent monolith among the barren trees of the estate. Tom greeted me with a warm embrace, but his usual exuberance seemed dulled. "You'll have to forgive the state of the place," he said, as he led me through the heavy wooden doors. The interior of the manor was like stepping back in time, with ornate fixtures and portraits of severe-looking ancestors peering down from the walls. Oddly, despite the warmth from the hearths, there was an undeniable chill that seemed to linger in the air. That night, as I lay in the guest room trying to sleep, I heard soft whispers floating through the halls. A chill crawled up my spine as my mind danced with possibilities of what it could be. At first light, I ventured out to explore the estate grounds, which were blanketed in a thick fog. The silence was unsettling. Even the birds seemed to avoid this place. I found an old graveyard just beyond the garden, the headstones worn by time and elements, the names barely readable. What stories they held, I could only imagine. The whispers grew louder each night, and odd sights began to manifest. I caught glimpses of ethereal figures in the corners of my vision, vanishing when I turned to face them. Tom confessed he'd seen them too, pointing out spots in the home where the air felt coldest, where the specters seemed to linger. It was in one such spot, at the end of a dark hallway, where I encountered her. A woman, dressed in the garb of Victorian nobility, her eyes hollow, her expression one of sorrow. She raised a finger to her lips, as if to silence me, before drifting backward into the shadows. My heart raced. No longer could I deny the estate was haunted. We were residing with Victorian specters, souls that clung to the living world, perhaps trapped by some unresolved misery. Tom and I pored over every journal and letter we could find within the estate's library that could offer us insight into the identity of the spirits. Hours turned into days as we pieced together the tragic tale of Elizabeth Harrow, a woman who had once lived in the manor and had lost her husband and child to scarlet fever. Despair had driven her to the brink, leading to her untimely demise right in this home. The more we learned, the more active the specters became, as if our attention emboldened them. Objects moved on their own, lights flickered erratically, and the temperature would drop so suddenly that our breath fogged even indoors. Tom grew pale and distant, and I began to fear for his sanity. His once sprightly demeanor now replaced with a vacant stare, as though he was listening to a voice only he could hear. We had to act. A local legend suggested that engaging with the spirits, acknowledging their plight, and offering them peace might help them move on. Late one night, we stood in the very spot where Elizabeth often appeared and spoke to the thin air. "Elizabeth, we know of your pain," I said, the words catching a little in my throat. "You are not forgotten. Your family is remembered." As if responding to our plea, a cold wind swept through the room, the candles flickered madly, and there she was, Elizabeth, as real as any living person. Her expression changed, the sorrow lifting just a little, as if she understood. The days that followed were calmer. The whispers faded to silence, and the temperature steadied. Tom regained his color and laughed for the first time since I'd arrived. We couldn't be sure whether our intervention had worked or if the phenomena would resume, but for the moment, an uneasy peace had settled over the manor. On the final night of my stay, however, a new development shook our fragile confidence. I woke suddenly, as if called from sleep by an unknown force. In the stillness of the night, I heard soft sobbing. Drawn like a moth to a flame, I found myself standing before the portrait of Elizabeth that hung in the main hall. The paint seemed to weep with her, the lines of her face softening, as if to reach across the boundaries of her painted prison. In that moment, I felt a strange warmth despite the chill and a sense of gratitude emanating from the portrait. Maybe we had eased her suffering, or perhaps she had accepted her fate. As I prepared to depart the next morning, I cast one last glance at the estate. Sunlight broke through the fog, illuminating the manor in a ghostly glow, a beacon in the darkness, holding its secrets close. With a mix of relief and mourning, I left Whitby behind, but the memory of those Victorian specters would haunt me. a stark reminder of the thin veil between the past and the present.